The Republic of Turkey has been a NATO member since 1952. In the over 70 years of membership, Turkey has on occasion found itself at odds with its fellow members, especially in the last decade. Despite this, the nation still holds a valuable position within NATO despite being a relative black sheep compared to the 31 other members of the alliance. In this video, I plan to examine the origins of Turkey's membership in NATO, the strife within NATO that they've been involved in, why they've been tolerated for so long by their fellow NATO members, and what value they provide to the alliance in 2024. First, let's look at the background of Turkey's NATO membership and some of Turkey's history in the first half of the 20th century, starting with World War I. At this point, the territory of modern Turkey was still under the control of the Ottoman Empire, which was ruled and dominated by ethnic Turks, and it was a Muslim-majority nation. The Ottoman Empire was discriminatory towards minority religious groups like Christians, but ethnic minorities within the empire were numerous and included Arabs, Jews, Kurds, Armenians, and others. For most of Ottoman history, these ethnic minorities were protected classes, albeit they were still considered inferior to the ruling Turks. This general acceptance would start to change in the late 19th century and collapse completely during World War I. By the time of the First World War, the Ottoman Empire had long been seen as a sick man in Europe due to the gradual decline in the empire's power starting in the mid-19th century. They had lost most of their European territory, and the Balkan Wars had taken almost all that remained of Ottoman Europe except for East Thrace. With their empire decline and the major European powers expecting an eventual collapse, the Ottoman Empire sided with the Central Powers of Germany and Austria-Hungary in what was viewed as a fight for survival. The war went poorly for the Ottomans. They lost most of their Arab territory to the British, suffered defeat in the Balkans, and had fought Russia, a historical adversary, to a stalemate in the Caucasus. By the end of the war, 2.8 to 3.2 million people in the empire had died, and the Turk-dominated government had carried out the Armenian and Greek genocides that killed 600 to 1 million Armenians and 300 to 900,000 Greeks. Though Turkey denies the genocide accusations to this day. The Ottoman defeat in World War I spelled the end of the empire, as the victorious Allies began dividing the spoils between themselves. This led to the Turkish War of Independence between nationalist Turks and the occupying Allied powers of Greece, France, and Britain, with Greece bearing the brunt of the fighting. Ultimately, the Turks were victorious and established the Republic of Turkey that persists to this day. The interwar period saw the rise of a one-party system in the new Turkish state, and most of this time was spent rebuilding the nation. The period also saw the collapse of any remaining protections for ethnic minorities and led to several rebellions by the Kurdish people seeking to create their own nation-state. These rebellions were put down by the Turks and resulted in thousands of Kurds being killed or displaced. This conflict with the Kurds will become a major feature of Turkey-NATO strife in the 21st century. During World War II, Turkey remained neutral for almost the entire conflict. They maintained trade relations with both the Allies and Axis and had little interest in being involved in a major conflict after the devastation suffered in the early part of the 20th century. Eventually, Turkey did declare war on Germany in February of 1945, but no Turkish troops ever saw combat. But the nation could at least claim they had a 500 record in world wars as opposed to Germany, who was now 0-2. In the aftermath of World War II, the Iron Curtain had begun to descend on Europe as the new ideological lines were being drawn between the communist East and capitalist West. In Greece, a civil war was raging between communists and anti-communists that lasted from early 1946 to late 1949, with the anti-communist Kingdom of Greece emerging victorious. Also in 1949, NATO was established, with the founding members being the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Belgium, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, and Portugal. NATO's primary mission is the collective defense of its member states via Article 5, commonly quoted as an attack on one is an attack on all. Article 4 is another means of assistance and can be invoked by member states to initiate a meeting of the other members over violations of territorial integrity or other issues that aren't large-scale attacks on a member state. Turkey began to seek membership within NATO due to fears of aggression from the Soviet Union. The Ottoman and Russian empires had fought a total of 12 wars from the mid-1500s to the First World War and had long been rivals, though the geopolitical positions of Turkey and the USSR were far different at the onset of the Cold War. In the aftermath of World War II, Turkey found themselves under pressure from the Soviets to establish a joint Turkish-Soviet administration over the Straits of the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus that control access to the Black Sea. These straits are the only access to the coasts of Bulgaria and Romania, both under communist control, and the Soviet Black Sea coast. The straits had been a point of contention between the Ottoman Empire and Russian Empire for centuries before, and Turkey was desperate for a security guarantee against the Soviet superpower. Turk membership in NATO was initially resisted by the US. They were denied entry as a founding member and were again denied in 1950. With the outbreak of the Korean War, Turkey agreed to commit 5,000 troops to the UN. Ultimately, nearly 15,000 Turks would serve in Korea, with 721 being killed in action. Turk support for the UN mission, along with strategic considerations in Europe, led the United States to push for Turkish membership in NATO in 1951. The US began to convince the other NATO members to support Turkish membership as well as Greek membership in the alliance. In February 1952, the longtime geopolitical rivals of Greece and Turkey were accepted into NATO. The addition of these two nations added a southern flank against the Eastern Bloc. It also provided a significant land border with the Soviet Union in the Caucasus. In the event of war, it also provided NATO the ability to access the Black Sea while simultaneously blocking Soviet access to the Mediterranean and their warm water ports in the Black Sea. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers constructed the Incirlik Air Base in southern Turkey that hosts NATO aircraft as well as American nuclear weapons. The U.S. also constructed the Izmir Air Station in western Turkey. Today, there's 5 major bases in Turkey utilized by NATO. NATO also gained a major foothold in Asia with the addition of Turkey, and the nation was a gateway to the Middle East. Turkey remains the only NATO nation located primarily in Asia and was NATO's only Muslim majority nation until the addition of Albania in 2009. For Turkey, they fell under the nuclear umbrella of the United States and gained access to American-made military equipment to modernize their armed forces. The protection of the alliance also meant that Turkey didn't have to worry about aggression from the Eastern Bloc, lest they risk a Third World War by attacking the Turks. Internally, Turkey largely remained committed to anti-communist positions, despite having many periods of internal strife. Turkey suffered from multiple coups and coup attempts by their armed forces, with 6 occurring between 1960 and 1971. The military exerted a significant amount of control over the internal politics of Turkey, but their anti-communist position of the Turkish government remained largely intact. Turkey played an interesting, albeit small and coincidental role in the Cuban Missile Crisis. As part of the agreement between the US and USSR to facilitate the removal of Soviet missiles from Cuba, the United States agreed to remove 15 Jupiter nuclear missiles from Turkey. The missiles were quickly becoming obsolete, and the small number made their removal a moral victory to save face for the Soviets more than a meaningful or at least equal agreement. The first major headache Turkey would help give NATO occurred over the island of Cyprus. The Cyprus issue is worthy of its own full-length video, but I'll try to hit the highlights here as best that I can. The island had found itself under the control of numerous empires throughout its history. First under the Romans, then the Byzantines, before being taken by the Ottoman Empire for 300 years, and finally Cyprus fell under British rule. In 1960, Cyprus gained independence from the United Kingdom, except for the British military bases at Akrotiri and Dhekelia. The island had a significant population of both Greeks and Turks, with the Greeks seeking unification with Greece, and the Turks seeking to divide the island between the two ethnic groups. This led to violence between the Greek and Turk populations of the islands throughout the 1950s, and only escalating after Cyprus gained independence in 1960. The Greek population sought to eliminate Turk influence on the island in order to better facilitate integration with Greece, something Greece itself supported, while Turkey and the Turkish Cypriot population continued to push for a partition of the island. Ethnic militias on both sides began attacking civilians, resulting in hundreds of deaths. Greece and Turkey both began to send small contingents of troops to the island throughout the 60s as peacekeepers. In 1967, a military junta arose in Greece after a coup. This junta adopted a more aggressive approach to the Cyprus issue, ultimately resulting in the junta sponsoring a coup in Cyprus itself in July of 1974 to create a puppet government that would lead to Greece annexing Cyprus. In response, Turkey launched an invasion of Cyprus. This brought two NATO members into conflict with one another, as Turkish troops were fighting against Greek troops, as well as Greek Cypriot militias. After a month, the Turks controlled a third of Cyprus, mostly the northern portion of the island, and had deposed the Cypriot coup leaders and caused the Greek military junta to collapse. Around 500 Turks died in the invasion, and 105 Greek soldiers were also killed. Hundreds of Cypriots were killed, including civilians and militia members. Turkey then created the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus and remains the only country in the world that recognizes it to this day. Internationally, Northern Cyprus is considered occupied Cypriot territory. Most of the Turk population also relocated to Northern Cyprus, effectively creating the ethnic divide they had sought for years. As a result of Turkey's invasion and forced partition, the UN intervened and created a demilitarized zone separating the two sides and dividing the Cypriot capital of Nicosia in half. The United States also instituted an arms embargo on Turkey after the invasion that remained in place for 3 years. Greece also withdrew their military support from NATO and refused to send their forces to any other NATO allies until 1980. The Cyprus crisis presented a major challenge to NATO as a whole, and the dispute remains unsolved today. If you'd like me to do a deeper dive on the Cyprus dispute, let me know in the comments below. Despite the tensions between Turkey and Greece in the 60s and 70s, Turkey's commitment to an anti-communist stance made all the more important for the US to continue to deal with them. In addition, NATO has no framework for removing a member nation from the alliance. Member states can voluntarily withdraw, but both Greece and Turkey needed NATO just as much or more than NATO needed them. For the remainder of the Cold War, there were no major flare-ups between Turkey and Greece, and Turkey remained an important part of the alliance. When Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990 and sparked the Gulf War, Turkey allowed coalition forces to utilize air bases within the country to launch attacks on Iraq. Turkey itself did not participate in combat operations during the war. With the end of the Cold War, Turkey found itself in a different strategic position than it had been before. It no longer shared a border with the now defunct Soviet Union, and former adversaries of the Warsaw Pact were on the path of becoming allies. German reunification began NATO's expansion east, followed by Hungary, Poland, and the Czech Republic in 1999, and then, in 2004, the Baltic states, Bulgaria, Romania, Slovakia, and Slovenia joined NATO. Turkey didn't make any significant waves during this period as Europe moved into a post-Soviet and post-communist world, as well as a world now threatened by Islamic extremism. In the wake of the September 11th attacks, the United States invoked Article 5 of NATO and invaded Afghanistan in October of 2001. NATO rallied in support of the United States, including Turkey. Throughout the war, Turkey maintained a small contingent of troops in Afghanistan. The number varied depending on the needs during the war, but was between a low of 1,300 to a high of just over 1,800. Turkish troops were largely used in non-combat missions in Afghanistan, usually engaged in humanitarian operations. Despite this, 15 Turks were killed in action during the war and numerous others were wounded. In 2003, Recep Erdogan became Prime Minister of Turkey, sparking what has become a nearly 21-year reign throughout a tumultuous political period in Turkey's history. I'll touch on Erdogan in a bit more detail later, but it's important to note that he is the man behind a lot of Turkey's foreign policy decisions in the last 20 years. Much like Cyprus, he's worth a whole video just on himself and his transformation of Turkey. In the lead up to the US invasion of Iraq, a NATO mission, Operation Display Deterrence, was deployed to Turkey to provide additional defensive support in case of attack by Iraq. Turkey also refused a US request to deploy 62,000 troops that were intended to be used to invade Iraq from the north to be a second prong to the main invasion that was going to originate in Kuwait. Turkey did allow the US coalition to conduct non-lethal missions from air bases located in Turkey, but also would not use their armed forces in the conflict in any way. While Turkey didn't necessarily find themselves aligned with Saddam, they were actively fighting a low-level Kurdish insurgency in their own territory being led by the Kurdish Workers' Party, commonly known as the PKK. Iraq had also fought numerous conflicts with the Kurds within Iraq, and the Kurds had established an autonomous region that bordered Turkey. Turkey was concerned that Kurdish support for the invasion would lead to the creation of an independent and internationally recognized Kurdish state that would make claims on the Kurdish regions of Turkey. While this ultimately did not come to pass, this Turk conflict with the Kurds would be a focal point well into the 2010s. With the outbreak of the Syrian Civil War in 2011, the entire country was driven into chaos with numerous factions emerging between the Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad, anti-government forces, Kurdish forces, and later ISIS and other fundamentalist groups. Syria became and remains a major battleground and proxy conflict for the major regional and global powers. With Turkey sharing a 560-mile border with Syria, they were far from immune from the conflict, whether by unintentional incidents or direct involvement. Initially, Turkey's involvement was nothing more than occasional clashes along the border. A notable incident occurred in June of 2012 when a Turkish F-4 Phantom was shot down off the coast of Syria by a surface-to-air missile launched by the Syrian armed forces. Both pilots were killed, and tensions between the two nations increased dramatically. In October of 2012, fighting near the Turkish border spilled over with several civilian deaths in Turkey, and lethal retaliation from Turkey in the form of counter-artillery bombardment. This led Turkey to invoke Article 4 of NATO and the creation of Operation Active Fence to help defend and secure Turkey's border with Syria. Despite this, occasional clashes still occurred. A significant internal event during the 2010s that can't be ignored is the July 2016 coup attempt in Turkey against the Erdogan government led by the Turkish armed forces. The coup failed in its goals to remove Erdogan from power and led to a series of purges and human rights abuses by Erdogan, as well as the total elimination of the Turkish military's influence on Turkish politics. The coup attempt was largely condemned and opposed by NATO and its member states. The key takeaway is that Erdogan was able to expand his power and influence in Turkey and allows him to flex his political muscles on the international stage in a bigger way. Much like other topics, the 2016 coup is worthy of its own dedicated video. Just a month after the coup, in August 2016, Turkey launched an invasion into northern Syria. The stated goals were to support the Syrian National Army rebel group against ISIS and alleged Kurdish terrorist groups. The main Kurdish umbrella group the Turks opposed is the Syrian Democratic Forces, a U.S.-backed group in the fight against ISIS that includes the People's Defense Units, or YPG. The U.S. attempted to intervene diplomatically on behalf of the Kurds, though they were only limited in their success. Turkey would launch 2 more incursions, one in 2018 and one in 2019, into Syria, largely targeting Kurdish forces that had established an autonomous region in northeastern Syria. Turkey views any independent Kurdish state as a potential threat. This concern is largely because of the 20 million Kurds living inside Turkey and the potential for them trying to reclaim that territory. The U.S. opposed both incursions due to the targeted Kurdish groups being important allies in the fight against ISIS. Turkey considers almost all armed Kurdish groups as terrorist organizations and tried to pressure the U.S. to cut off aid to these groups, albeit unsuccessfully. In 2019, the U.S. threatened sanctions on Turkey, and some U.S. politicians called for Turkey to be suspended from NATO. The biggest result from Turkey's actions was the United States formally recognizing the Armenian genocide via resolutions passed by both houses of Congress and a presidential announcement. This may seem mundane on its surface, but Turkey not only denies the existence of the genocide, but engages in a global denial campaign, often pressuring politicians in other nations against recognizing the genocide. Numerous administrations in the United States have refused to recognize the genocide due to the harm it would cause U.S.-Turk relations. But, despite all the diplomatic pressure, Turkey continues to occupy around 3,400 square miles of Syrian territory. These incursions and the subsequent diplomatic backlash from the U.S. and other NATO nations has led to a massive decline in relations that hasn't been seen since the Turkish invasion of Cyprus. Another point of contention was Turkey's purchase of Russian-made S-400 surface-to-air missile systems, despite protests from the U.S. over the purchase. This led to the U.S. removing Turkey from the F-35 program that was intended to replace Turkey's aging F-16s. In the aftermath of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Turkey, led by Erdogan, has tried to play both sides of the conflict. Turkey has offered and has been host to numerous negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, while also supplying Ukraine with domestically produced drones and denying the Russian Navy the ability to transit the Turkish Straits to reinforce their Black Sea fleet. Turkey also played a role in negotiating the Black Sea Grain Initiative as well. On the flip side, Turkey has refused to participate in sanctions on Russia due to their reliance on Russian gas exports and has considered participating with Russia on a next-gen fighter program. Perhaps the biggest headache Turkey has caused in recent memory is holding up the admission of Finland and Sweden into NATO. Turkey's primary stated reason has been the fact that Finland and Sweden allow members of various Kurdish organizations to live, work, and organize in their countries. Most of them are from the PKK. Turkey considers the organizations and their members as terrorists and tried to pressure the 2 Nordic nations to revise their terrorism laws in exchange for Turkey allowing them in NATO. This led to the U.S. refusing to sell new F-16s to Turkey unless they approved Finland and Sweden's admission to NATO. Turkey did approve Finland's admission in 2023 and finally agreed to Sweden's admission in 2024. Even more recently, in March 2024, President Erdogan of Turkey came out to say that they don't consider Hamas a terrorist organization while criticizing Israel, adding a further wrinkle to the relations with the United States. The recent decline in relations with Turkey has led to numerous calls for Turkey to be removed from NATO or their membership suspended. For better or worse, there is no mechanism to remove a member state from NATO. This is likely part of the reason Turkey feels emboldened to try and make demands in the case of Finland and Sweden. Any concessions in their favor help further their goals, but as seen with the pause of the US sale of F-16s, there's ways to put pressure on Turkey as well. Despite these diplomatic scuffles, Turkey still finds itself in a strategic position for NATO. Turkey has been important in the war against ISIS, even if they extend that fight to Kurdish forces. Their control of access to the Black Sea has been thrust to the forefront since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Turkey also has the second largest military in the alliance with over 690,000 active personnel. The only country with more is the United States, and France is in third with 208,000 personnel. Turkey's defense spending also accounts for 1.89% of their GDP, which is just under the NATO goal of 2%. For Turkey, they are heavily reliant on NATO for military equipment. Turkey currently has well over 200 US-made F-16s in its Air Force, as well as dozens of other US and other allied nations' aircraft. While Turkey has produced a large amount of domestic small arms and light vehicles, they are reliant on NATO for heavy vehicles. They currently have over 300 Leopard 2s, over 300 Leopard 1s from Germany, over 700 M48 patents, and over 600 M60 patents, as well as hundreds of APCs from the United States, mainly M113s. Their navy also contains 13 German-built submarines, a Spanish-designed and domestically built light carrier, 8 former U.S. Oliver Hazard Perry class frigates, and 4 German-designed and produced frigates. So despite everything, Turkey is here to stay as a member of NATO, and both sides need the other. Turkey needs access to the military equipment of their NATO allies, as well as the U.S. nuclear umbrella and the defense guarantee of the rest of the alliance, while NATO needs Turkey as a bastion in Asia and as a gateway to the Middle East and the Black Sea. With Iran becoming a major threat in the Middle East, Turkey will be an important ally in any conflict with them. Also, since there's no way to force Turkey out of NATO, and Turkey has no reason to leave, the US and the rest of NATO will just have to learn to deal with them. President Erdogan, the primary agent for the decline in Turkey-NATO relations, has indicated that he will not run for re-election in 2028. If true, the end of the decade and the 2030s may see a new era, perhaps in a more positive direction. A lot can happen between now and then, and it's impossible to predict the future. I also think it's important to acknowledge that while a lot of the issues between NATO and Turkey have a negative connotation to them, I believe it's largely because they tend to go against the interests of the United States and other members of NATO. Turkey is a proud nation with a strong nationalist sentiment dating back centuries. Most of their actions, from the invasion of Cyprus to the incursions into Syria, have been done for their own national interests and perceived national security threats. It's hard to fault a nation for acting in its perceived best interests, even when that causes conflict between their own allies. Turkey's actions shouldn't be seen as inherently right or wrong. I know this video has been a lot longer than most of my others, but it's a topic I really want to talk about in a bit of detail. If there's anything in this video you think I missed, please let me know, and if there's a topic I discussed that you'd like covered in more detail, let me know that as well. I hope you found this video informative, and if you did, please leave a like on the video, and I'll see you on the next one.